This is Steve Zeltzer, and I'm with Work Week, and I am focusing now on a very important commemoration on February 11th, which is the anniversary of the 1937 Flint sit-down of General Motors. And this action by the workers in General Motors who were trying to organize a union had a riveting effect on the entire working class in the United States and really broke the back of General Motors, and is an example to workers, the history of the working class in the United States and how you can really organize against companies that, on a matter of principle, said they didn't want to accept the unions. And we know there are a lot of companies in the United States today that have a similar stance. Amazon, many other companies do not believe that the workers have a right to have unions. And joining us is a panel of union activists and supporters who are going to be involved in this commemoration event, online commemoration event.
My name is Jean Anderson. I'm from Local 599, Flint, Michigan, the Buick Motor Division. I was part of women organizing the Junior Women's Emergency Brigade of 1985. And I'm here today to talk about the 50th anniversary where the women from the 1936 37 sit down gave us permission to enter the parade as a marching cadre representing their struggle. So that's why I'm here today.
Okay, well, why don't we talk about that? I mean, we're coming up in the anniversary. Why is it important today that auto workers and American workers know about this history?
It's important because I think sometimes people have a misunderstanding, though, especially the role of women during that time. These women were not only just supporters of the men that were sitting in the plants, but they were involved in many social issues prior to the sit down. Especially Janora Dollinger and Nellie Simon, who were actually the leaders of that, but they made a clear decision that they were going to stay in that fight as long as they could, because they understood that without supporting these workers, that it would make a difference in their lifestyles, the economics for the city, the future for their children. So their struggles were clear to them of what they had to do. Their role was to stand outside the plants at that time. They used socks with soap in it to actually break the windows of so the men could breathe when they put tear gas into the plants. They actually put their babies in a stroller and push the babies in front of the soldiers and the police officers when they tried to enter the plants. They encouraged the men. Janora Dollinger was outside with bullhorns, encouraging the men to stay strong during the time that they were in there, encouraging the people to stay firm and support the people outside the plants. These women, even after the strike was over, maintained their position in the city by being involved not only in the union, but also trying to make certain that people who weren't able to have a voice, to give them a voice into many different types of struggles. So I don't know whether that answered, your question, but
well, most workers don't know about that history and the role that women played in organizing for a victory of the General Motors auto workers. So it's important to learn about that history. And also joining us is Martha Grevatt. Martha, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about this upcoming event and why you're involved in this?
Martha Grevatt, retired from UAW Local 869, served on the executive board of that local as well as Local 122 before that, until my plant in Ohio closed. And I'm on the steering committee of Unite All Workers for Democracy. I've also, over the years, done a lot of research on the Flint sit-down strike and the general labor movement, the context in which it occurred, in which we finally won recognition as a union at General Motors. And it's really important now to study that history and to learn that when workers engage in combat with the corporations, even though it's risky and it takes a lot of courage, but that's what's going to win. The things that we've given up, the things that working people need today to survive. It's an important example what's now being called class struggle unionism, and we've got to revive that, or it's like a sink or swim situation for us.
And unite all workers for democracy. It seems there's been a struggle in the UAW for democracy over an administration caucus, which is run pretty autocratically and hasn't allowed for democracy. Do you think that is one of the issues, not just for the UAW, but all unions in the United States?
I would say for an overwhelming majority of the unions in the United States, the struggle to democratize and to bring back rank and file control of our union goes hand in hand with the struggle to revive militancy and to make our unions fighting unions and to get them out of cozy relationship with the corporate ruling class.
And Sean, you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Sean Crawford. I'm a member of UAW Local 160. I've been a UAW member since 2008 when I hired into General Motors under the Tier 2 contract, where basically folks were doing the same work at half the wage. Fortunately, that situation has been somewhat mitigated, but we still have a long way to go as far as pensions and other things are concerned. So there's a lot of room for militancy, a lot of room for growth, and to win back what we've lost over these last 30 or 40 years of concessions that we've taken. And I have to say, I wholeheartedly agree with what Martha said about class conscious unionism. You know, if we don't have that idea of solidarity and equality and mutually lifting one another up, we're never going to get back to the quality of life that our forefathers and mothers fought and some of them died for. And so that's why I'm here, and that's why I believe White Shirt Day is an extremely important holiday, not just for UAW members, but for all union and working people, as an example and a reminder of what we can do if we're actually united as a class.
And at the fight for equal pay for equal work, that seems to have been lost in the, not just the UAW, but other unions, that you have some workers working at one rate of pay and other workers working at a different rate of pay, and they're doing the same work. Is this part of the problem that we have in the labor movement? Well,
it's another way of breaking down solidarity, you know, divide and conquer the workforce from within. It makes the union weaker institutionally. And there's so many different ways that they do it. It's not just tier 1 and tier 2, but it's all these subcontracted groups where a lot of the work used to be in-house, you know, like a lot of the, say, for example, janitorial work used to be considered a high seniority job that someone would desire to get into, you know, a few years before they retired, so they could kind of take it easy and not be, you know, destroying their body and joints and ligaments, doing all that repetitive motion work on the assembly line. And now those jobs, they don't even make half the wage anymore. They're ran by outsourced corporations. And so that's yet another way that they break down solidarity. But of course, you can expand that beyond just what's happening within the plants themselves. There's a matter of dividing workers by industry, by nationality. There's all different ways that you can divide up workers and make sure that they're weaker, while simultaneously the corporate class, the capitalist class, is united. You see, they have a global presence everywhere. You know, it's the big three are not just a U.S. company anymore. They're all over the world. And if workers don't think in the same way and understand that we are a global class, we're always going to be behind the global capitalist class, and we're going to be weaker as a result.
Thank you, Sean. And last but not least, Frank Hammer.
I'm Frank Hammer. I'm a retired UAW GM worker out of Warren, Michigan, a GM transmission plant before it closed, and was formerly a president and chairman of that local, and also served the International Union on the umpire staff in the GM department before I retired at the end of 2006. And we can talk about this event.
Well, this event of commemoration, first of all, why hasn't the UAW commemorated this event and educated their members about this important event, which was really the founding of the union, this action that was taken by these workers, the women? You would think that the UAW would want every member to understand how their union came about.
The UAW does have a Flint sit-down light presentation that happens in Flint at one of the locals in Flint. Local 659 is where I recall that they've held these events, but they've kept it really localized. They've kept it only to commemorate the workers in Flint, and don't see a way of sharing all the important lessons that were learned from that struggle for the whole entire UAW, never mind the entire working class, because it is of a working class global importance. This strike is recognized as that. And then their history that they do give is not an authentic history, and that's why we're putting on this commemoration, because we want to get back to the authentic roots of the UAW. And the current leadership of the UAW is extremely reluctant, will refuse to really tell the real story. And we're in a moment now where we have a new leadership coming in, is already in place as a result of one member, one vote. And before the elections are all over at the end of February, we may have actual majority on the International Executive Board. And what better time to introduce people to the authentic history of the UAW, especially in light of negotiations with the Detroit 3 this fall.
And Gene, one of the issues today is that a lot of rank and file members, younger members, are very angry. It's working $14, $15 an hour on an auto assembly floor, and workers are angry about their conditions. In the 30s, when this action took place in 1937, there was also a lot of anger, but it seems like the union really was able to bring that anger together and organize it so that the union could be successful in defending all the workers. Is that what happened in 37?
Yes, and I would have to go back from what I understood. When the workers decided to sit down in the plant, some of the Black workers, or the majority of the Black workers, decided to walk out because they really didn't feel that this was their fight. But it took people like Bud Simon to understand when he found out that Roscoe Van Zandt, because they didn't know really that he had decided to stay in the plant, that they would put him out front to unite the workers, because race was one of the things that they used in order to keep the workers apart. And not only that, but to undermine some of the efforts that the workers were trying to accomplish. So when they left out of the plant, we witnessed where Roscoe Van Zandt actually carried the American flag, and the workers were surrounding him. He led the workers out. So it was a demonstration, a visual demonstration to the rest of the workers that we are not going to allow race or gender to separate us as workers. But I'd have to say this, that, that was a clear understanding that the workers understood. But sometimes the leadership would have to catch up with what the workers understood, because some of the leaders after that did not take on that same concept. And they started separating the women. They started separating the Blacks. In fact, the Blacks were the jobs that Sean had mentioned earlier, actually were, they did the sanitation work. And even though it was the best work, but they would consider that as something menial that only Blacks could do. So, yeah, the workers understood it, but the momentum sort of died along the way. And I think this is something that we would have to recapture in order to not come up with that same tactics that the corporations are using against us.
Well, it seems the unification of the workers in plants and in this country and in the world is critical if workers are going to be successful. with global corporations. And Sean, I understand that this event is also going to have GM workers from around the world. Why don't you talk about the fact that you're bringing in workers on a global level to a discussion on the anniversary of the Flint sit-down?
Well, one of the interesting things that really made Flint unique is that Flint was a company town. You know, General Motors, that was where General Motors was founded. That's where most of the facilities were. And so it made it fairly easy, relatively speaking, to form a culture of solidarity, a culture of class unionism. But now GM is global. Now companies are global. And so what we really need to do is build that sense of class unity that stretches across the globe to where all the different facilities are, regardless of what language people speak, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their cultural backgrounds. We have to unite because we have a similar class interest. We're all being exploited in the exact same way in our different facilities, right? And so a lot of these things are an illusion, like, oh, say, for example, on the shop floor, a lot of times you'll have people who are resentful of foreign workers taking their jobs. But really, it's not the workers themselves that are taking their jobs. It's the capitalist class that are exploiting these people in third world countries that don't have the same kind of labor and environmental protections that we have here. They're taking advantage of these people, and we need to look at these people as our comrades in arms in this struggle so we can come together and actually fight for a better contract, right? Because if workers overseas have better contracts, have better labor agreements and rights, then there won't be such an incentive to move our jobs overseas, right? So there's a win-win situation when we start supporting our working class brothers and sisters across the globe. Not only are they going to get better conditions and better wages and be able to support their family, but it's going to make us more secure as well, right? So we have to start thinking more globally if we want to win. Because like I said before, we're just going to fall further and further and further behind if we don't understand that, what the capitalist class already understands and has understood for many years now.
And Martha, the U.S. government, with the support of in the recent USMCA agreement, United States-Mexico Canadian contract, had this free trade agreement following up NAFTA. They outsourced jobs, many UAW jobs, to Mexico. The Mexican workers at General Motors recently organized. Do you see the future of maybe joint actions, Mexico, U.S. workers together, so that the company can't pit one against another? If there's a strike here, they increase production in China, they'll increase production in Mexico. In other words, to break the strike here. How do you see organizing an international labor movement and bringing all GM workers or all Ford workers together on a global level?
Absolutely. That's really imperative for the labor movement in any country to make strides. It's through international solidarity that we can push back and beat back the capitalists who are exploiting all of us. And if you go back to, I think, 1997, the UPS strike that was led by Ron Carey, one of the reasons they won at a time when strikes were being lost more often than they were won, but because the UPS workers in this country built solidarity with UPS workers in Europe and other countries, that helped win the strike. And there was also more recently a situation where workers in Mexico right during the time that GM workers in the US were on strike, they refused to work overtime because they were being asked to work overtime so that GM could build up a stockpile and have a stockpile during the strike. And they said they were not going to scab on their UAW siblings in this country. It's global solidarity is building a global class-wide movement is the way forward, really, for all of humanity and for the planet, for that matter.
And Frank, the situation of UAW is that you have not only you have major auto plants, foreign implants in the South, Nissan, VW, many of these auto plants, but also you have all these parts plants, non-union parts plants in the United States. How do you see organizing this upcoming bargaining struggle to bring all auto workers together, to organize the South, all these auto plants, and also to bring the parts plant workers so they're together with the auto plant workers.
The tall order, which you just described. But I think that the UAW has been largely an impasse over the last 30, 40 years in terms of its ability to attract workers in the southern non-union plants to become union members and become, as a result, more powerful together. And it used to be that they were going to set their standards by what UAW members won in contracts. But over the last decade or two, it's actually been reversed. Now UAW members are being, the demands of them is to meet the standards that are being set in the non-union plants in the South. So that's got to be reversed, and it's clear that the current leadership of the administration caucus, number one, has overwhelmingly not been successful in those efforts. I mean, for example, they tried to organize Smyrna in Tennessee on 3 separate occasions and came up short. Tried to organize Volkswagen workers in Chattanooga and so on, and lost. What's made it worse is that the recent corruption scandal has enabled the right-wing forces like National Right to Work Committee and Union Facts to smear the UAW, saying to enlarge billboards, for example, in Chattanooga, you don't want the corrupt UAW here, do you? So it's made it much more difficult, and I think that the only way they're going to be able to overcome is with new leadership at the helm of the UAW.
And Gene, one of the issues, the growth of racism, xenophobia, and attacks on Black workers, brown workers, Asian workers. The UAW used to play a much more important role in fighting racism. And do you think that if the UAW began to take the lead in the fight against racism in this country, particularly in the South, but all over, there's racism in every part of this country, that it would be able to change its organizing ability and link up workers like in the South so that they would see the UAW as a vehicle to change the kind of conditions they have and the systemic racism going on in these plants throughout the country?
Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind because of the fact that that was one of the things that the UAW took a strong stand during the civil rights movement. They took, especially in the city of Flint, where places of business that refused to do business with minorities, they would boycott those businesses. And one of the first things that I can remember that there was a bowling alley in Flint, Michigan, that actually would not allow Blacks to bowl there. And the officers from Local 659 and 599 joined in together and went and not only boycotted, but demanded that shoes and bowling equipment would be rented to some of them, their officers that had been elected, Black officers that had been elected. So taking a personal and a universal role in making certain that no worker, regardless of where you come from, and like Sean had mentioned, whatever your ethnic background is, to understand that we're brothers and sisters and we are in this fight together. When they said solidarity, it did not have a question of race. It had a question of class. And as long as we understand that and stand together firmly, I think we could see another light for the workers in this country.
And workers do have this power in the United States. They have a long history of struggle, but as we've discussed, a large number of workers in this country are unaware of the history. So this event that you're going to have is probably going to be the first of many in the UAW and other unions as well. I'm in the CWA. There are many other unions going to have similar events about their history and the history of struggle against racism, the history for equality, for equal work, equal pay, and for a democratic union. Frank, how can people participate in this event and watch it and learn from it?
So we're going to sponsor the webinar on Saturday, February the 11th, which will be the 86th anniversary of the sit-downs. It'll be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We'll have invites for the event through Facebook, and We will also feature it as, I believe, on YouTube and maybe even FaceTime. Not FaceTime. Anyway,
Zoom.
live stream through Facebook. So if by any chance you're working on Saturday and you're not going to be able to make it, you'll be able to come back to it and view it after the fact. But you can all, many of you can all join with our webinar, and it'll be a really you'll love the fact that you did.
And I'm reaching out to some Tesla workers at Fremont, where they face Elon Musk, this union buster who fired 700 workers to prevent a union there. And also the systemic racism there. The black workers there call it the plantation, because of the conditions of that plant. So I think it's important that they see this history as well and know that the UAW and union organization has the power to change their reality and build a place where they can live with equality and fight as a united force for their rights. So I definitely agree that this event is going to be very important. And I want to thank you all for joining us on Work Week. And we'll put a link up to the event. And I think also people should go to that film, Babies and Banners. Maybe you can talk about the film lastly, Jean, and what was the film and why is that film important?
The film is important because first of all, it showed that the workers were willing to risk it all. They understood the importance of taking a firm stand for what they believed in. And the film shows that the women's role were not what some people would like to believe, that women were just in the kitchen. Women took a strong, serious stand that we have to pass on to the sisters, to the women today. That when we understand that women's role, they are leaders. I'm proud to see that these young women that had recently won elections through the international, they represent women from 1937 to the women from 1985, the Junior Women's Emergency Brigade, to the women that are today. These women in 37 set this, they set the table high. The women in 1985 carried that banner on. What is beautiful to see is to pass that baton on now, to see these young women as regional directors. And I don't know the exact, but I think several of them have won elections, and they are strong union women. They're not just women that go along to get along. So that's, I think that's the role of the women from then, from 37, to the women that are present today.
Well, thank you very much. And people can also go and see Babies and Banners. It's on YouTube. You'll be having the director there talk about the film, the significance of the film, and its relevance today. So I want to thank all of you for joining us on Work Week. And I think it's important that all American workers and workers around the world know the real history of the American working class, which is very powerful and has built solidarity. So thanks for joining us on Work Week.
Thank you. Solidarity.
Solidarity,
Thank you,
brothers and sisters.
Solidarity.
Thank you.